Salam sejahtera, anda sedang menonton AWANI Global bersama saya, Naila Huda. ASEAN dan China baru-baru ini mengumumkan Perkongsian Strategik Komprehensif atau Strategic Comprehensive Partnership CSP di Sidang Kemuncak ke-24 ASEAN-China. Dan ini menambah satu lagi lapisan kepada hubungan dialog antara ASEAN dan China setelah mengekalkan kerjasama strategik sejak 2003. Namun, adakah CSP ini melambangkan sebarang pembaharuan kepada negara-negara anggota ASEAN? Dan bagaimana untuk ASEAN mentafsir CSP atau kerjasama ini, sedangkan masih terdapat masalah dengan kepercayaan terutamanya dengan isu maritim di Laut Cina Selatan. Sudah bersedia untuk mengupas isu ini Angeline Tan, penyelidik dari ISIS Malaysia. Terima kasih kepada Angeline. Thank you, Angeline, for joining me on AWANI Global today. Firstly, I want to understand, in the context of the recent ASEAN-China summit, what exactly does a comprehensive strategic partnership, a CSP, entail or mean in this context?
Right. So a CSP, it's very symbolic of the importance of high-level engagement, that relations is going to take on very substantive engagement. So because it is comprehensive, there will be strategic alignment on all aspects of the relations. So for example, economic, socio-cultural, as well as political and security cooperation. They will all see deepened engagement, and there will be planning for a long-term sustainable development between in the relations as well. So it's not just about cooperation, but CSP, it's really about this intention to create strong and resilient partnerships.
Now, what's sort of triggered a little debate is understanding the CSP from the ASEAN perspective. Is the establishment of the CSP seen as an upgrade in the status of the ASEAN-China relationship, or has it just remained the same?
Well, I mean, the CSP, it is significant, right? Because it shows that it's going to be, there will be strengthened, deepened, prioritized relations between ASEAN and China. So this is definitely something that's meaningful, and ASEAN member states appreciate the CSP with China. However, ASEAN member states have also been very careful not to explicitly call this an upgrade, because this doesn't mean that China is going to be placed above any of ASEAN's other dialogue partners. Doesn't mean China is more important, because ASEAN does believe in an inclusive and multipolar regional order. So they're careful not to do anything that will tilt the regional balance, that will make it seem as if they are leaning closer to one side.
Before we go in a little bit deeper about ASEAN's decision not to label this as an upgrade, we want to see this also from the Chinese perspective. How can we understand China's decision to upgrade so-called this bilateral ties with ASEAN to a CSP? Do you see this coming from a renewed position of strength for China?
It's not really about a renewed position of strength. It actually has more to, it's actually a continuation and an evolution of China's neighborhood diplomacy, which became especially active under President Xi Jinping. And, you know, Beijing's foreign policy with ASEAN in the last few years, it's focused heavily on cooperation and mutual development. So the CSP is really just a natural next step in relations with ASEAN. Beijing, they have always considered ASEAN as a very strategic, important place, partner. So the CSP, or something similar to the CSP, has always been part of the long-term plan. And then on the other hand, this is also all coming at a time when the US is really increasing its engagement in the region. So this is also one way to show that Beijing has they still have very strong diplomatic influences in Southeast Asia. So I wouldn't go necessarily as far as to say Beijing has plans or ambitions to play a stronger role in Southeast Asia, but they have always made it a point. Beijing wants to be deeply engaged in Southeast Asia. They want to continue being very active in the region.
Is there a hierarchy or a structure of some sort as to how China sets or arranges its bilateral ties? Because we know now there's this comprehensive strategic partnership with ASEAN as opposed to how it was before, and also its relationship with other countries. It's perhaps just a strategic partnership or just a comprehensive partnership. So there are different names to this. Is there a structure? Is there a hierarchy? How do we understand China's bilateral ties here?
Well, a comprehensive strategic partnership is very significant. It represents one of the, if not the highest level of engagement in bilateral relations. So there is kind of sort of a hierarchy here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this label, it won't define whether or not it is more important than the other to China as a partner. It doesn't change the status of your relations. What it really means is how you're able to communicate with each other, how you're able to cooperate and work together in more productive, effective ways.
So this CSP is formed between China and all the member states of ASEAN, but how does this impact or perhaps give an effect of some sort to each individual member states and its relationship with China?
I think as a whole, this will give all ASEAN member states an opportunity to improve their relations with China bilaterally. But every individual ASEAN member state, they have very different kinds of relationships with China. So it really depends on the individual country as well. But overall, I do see this as an improvement.
How exactly does the CSP is set apart from the existing ASEAN-China relationship?
Right. So this is there are a lot of things to really that really sets it apart. That it is significant for a reason, right? So the CSP is an intensification of existing cooperation between ASEAN and China. So we will see the relationship move to new heights in many different areas. So firstly, I think to me, what is most significant is we will see more increased commitment from China to multilateralism in the region. So take, for example, China's COVID diplomacy. So far, it's been focused on bilateral assistance, direct donations and assistance from China given to specific ASEAN countries. China, because they have traditionally preferred bilateral relations, they see bilateral relations as a more effective means of resolving issues and strengthening meaningful relationships. So, what is really new with this CSP is that China has announced COVID commitments to ASEAN as a whole, as a region, instead of individual countries. So this is showing that China's playing a more engaged role in multilateralism in Southeast Asia specifically, which is an aspect that was lacking before. And this will promote regional and international cooperation. And then other than that, this CSP will also bring closer economic ties and increased connectivity, which is ultimately also what we want, right? Improved relations, productive relations. And this will be especially important for our economic recovery from the pandemic. It's very important that ASEAN remains a top priority to China, especially when China does decide to fully open up again, right? This zero COVID strategy that they have, it has affected our connectivity and our potential economic ties with China. So it's important that when they open up, we are first on their list to engage with. And I also think it's worth taking note that this CSP, it will play a role in the progress of the situation in the South China Sea. So in trying to advocate for stronger bilateral relations and trying to basically call for this CSP, right? Beijing has indicated that they're willing to step up to for more dialogue, more productive consultations on issues of the South China Sea. And with this, my words, upgraded relationship, ASEAN is going to have greater leverage probably on dialogue on the South China Sea, provided that they are able to speak with a unified voice. So in a nutshell, there are a lot of things that that are bigger and brighter, that the relations are heightened. And what the CSP really means is that there's going to be closer alignment on all aspects of the relationship. It's not just focused on one. So the existing and strong and positive economic cooperation, it's not going to take precedence over other aspects like security in the South China Sea.
Okay, before we go on a little bit deeper in South China Sea, I do want to look at China's growing influence in the region, which we know, it's largely due in part to China's growing economic influence. But with this new CSP, will we see China perhaps flexing more of its soft power or a little bit of more cultural influence here?
Yes, I think part of the CSP, the socio-cultural side of it, is to enhance people-to-people relations. So I think they are looking to promote soft power in Southeast Asia. They're looking at increased youth exchanges, university scholarships. They were also looking at they're hosting the Olympics next year and the Asian Games next year, the Winter Olympics. So that's also one of the opportunities that they're hoping to engage with Southeast Asia, with inviting people to China to learn more and understand it better.
Okay. Now, I do want to look a little bit into the Foreign Minister Wang Yi's speech as he elaborated a little bit further on what exactly does the CSP mean. And he proposed 5 points as the key thrusts of ASEAN-China, one of which is the last point, defending justice and fairness in the global governance. What exactly does this mean in the context of China's narrative in understanding justice in global governance?
I think this idea of China's idea of global governance is a very hot topic in international politics, and I think it's very much misunderstood and sometimes demonized, but it's very simple. China's idea of global governance is one that is open and inclusive, and they want it to be able to have space for different kinds of perspectives. So they call it like multilateralism with Asian perspectives as part of global governance. And if you really think about it, it's not too different from the ASEAN way. And this narrative of justice in global governance, it's quite interesting, but it basically is just centered around this idea of right to development and prosperity, regardless of your social system, your ideology, your development strategy. It basically, this idea of justice is the right to a development path, however that country sees fit. And China, they see themselves as very much, they see themselves as a developing country. And arguably, they even see themselves as the champion of the developing country because the developing world. And, in this sense, they see ASEAN as their natural partner. And our strong emphasis on the ASEAN way, it's very much aligned to their ideas of justice in the global system. So, we ideally we work well together in advancing this vision, this that it is not very well understood in the West. And I also acknowledge that there is some skepticism with that China's pushing for this like Sino-centric regional or world order. But I think this is where the CSP can come in, and ASEAN can really use the CSP to leverage this. And this will be a test on ASEAN's resilience as an institution, but also as a regional player.
This idea of creating your own path in development surely must appeal to a lot of developing countries, particularly in ASEAN. But is this narrative still popular? Is this something that still appeals to ASEAN countries in this day and age when they're still struggling with achieving the developed status, just like Malaysia itself, and with all sorts of contemporary issues? Excluding, just for this sake, is the maritime issues in South China Sea, but just looking at economic development and looking at now the COVID-19 pandemic, is this idea still appealing to Southeast Asian countries?
I think appealing is a very interesting way of framing it, because it's not just. I think it's the way China presents it that makes some policymakers quite skeptical. But the idea of China's global governance is like I said, quite similar to the ASEAN way. But because China doesn't do a very good job at articulating and presenting this idea, if you don't understand the concept, you're less likely to embrace it. So that is the hesitation here on our part. But I think it's just an issue of communication and really working together. There's no real reason why the ASEAN and China should have a clash when it comes to this idea of regional governance.
Perhaps one issue that can come up is the maritime issues in South China Sea. So how exactly can we understand ASEAN's attempt to navigate the CSP and this renewed or this elevation of bilateral ties with China, as well at the same time still trying to communicate and trying to leverage the maritime issues in South China Sea?
Um, well, the CSP offers a really good opportunity to encourage all stakeholders to get involved in this. You know, it means that China and other ASEAN claimant states, we can no longer delay progress on the South China Sea, especially the Code of Conduct. It's not a comprehensive strategic partnership if we're only focusing on the rosy things, right, like economic cooperation. However, the CSP, it also doesn't guarantee that China or the Southeast Asian states will be more cooperative or more likely to resolve these issues or any other security issue. Um, so how this all plays out really will demonstrate the political will of China and ASEAN states, and it's going to it will be a test. The CSP, I see it as a test of the vitality and resilience of, I guess, ASEAN members' commitment, and as well as China's commitment to the relations.
Just looking back on the several reports and issues coming out of South China Sea just this year, do you see that there is a more pressing need to tackle this issue, and especially with the new CSP? What can we expect in the coming year?
There is definitely a need to tackle. There is an urgency for sure to tackle this issue, especially in the South China Sea. The I think next year marks the 20 years since the declaration of the code was established, and I think over 20 years later, we still don't have an actual code of conduct. So diplomatically, the South China Sea there has just been no concrete progress. But that's not to say that that's an end all and that the South China Sea is an absolute failure. There are definitely ways to work around the issue, but more diplomatically needs to be done about it, and there is an urgency. So hopefully, the CSP will give the push that is needed on all parties.
Now we want to look at the CSP from other perspectives. We also know ASEAN also agreed to establish the CSP with Australia at the first annual ASEAN-Australia Summit in October. What does this mean for ASEAN, and how can we understand ASEAN's attempt to sort of balance the major powers in the region?
Well, so to be clear, the ASEAN Australia CSP, it was established just 1 month ago, 1 month before the CSP with China. So I think this is actually a prime example of ASEAN's skilled attempt at managing the balance of power in the region, managing the major power competition. And it's a really great way of trying to of avoiding seeming like they are leaning to one side. It provides ASEAN with the opportunity to hedge. When they signed both the CSPs, it indicated that ASEAN is not going to play a bystander role. When a few months ago, earlier this year, when the US began increasing engagement in the region, there was a lot of worry that ASEAN might be forced to choose sides. But by establishing these two CSPs with China and Australia so closely together, ASEAN is showing that they're playing an active role in this evolving regional architecture. It is asserting ASEAN centrality as major competition intensifies in the region. And I think ASEAN isn't given enough credit for this. They're doing a really good job.
You did mention a little bit about the increase in America's engagement in the region. How will they understand this CSP, or have they understood from the time and the space given to ASEAN that they are able to handle the balance of powers in the region? But how can this be effectively communicated with the US?
Well, first off, I don't think that the US would see this CSP with China as a surprise. I think they expect China to engage closer with us. Especially as Washington is zeroing in on the region. Inevitably, of course, China is going to want to strengthen its partnerships with allies in the region. So this is not going to come as a surprise, and I don't think this will cause any concern in Washington. Right now, the Biden administration's they're currently working from a position of strength, right? And they seem to be quite confident with the current direction of their strategy in the Indo-Pacific. They're very much focused with engaging with their allies, some of which are ASEAN member states, and they're also trying to maintain relations with China. They have the US. They've been very clear that their interests in the region is to cooperate, to improve relations, to grow relations and opportunities. They're very careful not to play into this narrative of US-China competition or rivalry. They're very careful to avoid intensifying the competition with with China. So I don't think they're too worried. But on the other hand, the CSP also it's coming at a time when Cambodia is going to take on the ASEAN chairmanship for 2022, and China has very significant relations with Cambodia. So I think there is some kind of worry that China may leverage its relations with Cambodia to influence ASEAN relations. So this is something that I think many people will be keeping their eye on. But nevertheless, the US, they will continue to focus on the positives in its engagement in Southeast Asia. Hopefully the CSP with China, they will also spur more traction in Washington to move forward with the US ASEAN relationship.
So you see this as being a relatively good year for ASEAN. How much do you think Brunei's role as chair of ASEAN this year played a part in being an active player, and what can we expect from Cambodia being the chair of ASEAN next year? Now that we're coming to the end of the year, how can we sort of wrap up this entire year with Brunei as chair, and what can we expect for the upcoming year?
I think considering all of the challenges that have been presented last year and this year, Brunei has definitely played a very important role in making sure that ASEAN is working together on a lot of issues. They have definitely been dealt with a very, very difficult task. Especially there's a lot of talk that ASEAN is ASEAN centrality, or ASEAN as an institution, is weakening as COVID has really forced all member countries, or every country in the world really, to turn inwards and focus on the domestic side of things. So the fact that there have been so many foreign policy achievements this year within ASEAN is quite significant, and Brunei does deserve some credit for it. Geopolitically, there has a lot been going on as well with the change of the U.S. administration, their comeback to the Indo-Pacific, to the region. It's just been very turbulent. But so these are all issues that Cambodia will inherit for 2022 as well. It will be quite interesting to see how this will play out, because in 2016, when they were chair, there were certain issues that I think many people were not so happy with. So, for example, a statement on the South China Sea was not, announced when they were chair in 2016. So there is also that worry. What does that mean for ASEAN-China relations, especially now that there is the CSP? How is Cambodia going to? What are their plans for ASEAN unity, especially with pandemic recovery, and how is Cambodia going to lead the way in their approach to the Myanmar situation?
Yeah.
There's just a lot of things that there's a lot of challenges that Cambodia is going to inherit.
Yeah, that does lead me to the next and perhaps the last question. To do with the Myanmar crisis. We can look at the recent Reuters report how a Chinese envoy has reportedly lobbied Southeast Asian nations to let Myanmar's military ruler attend the ASEAN-China summit. What are your thoughts regarding this? Can we see this as China's involvement in the Myanmar crisis and ASEAN's involvement to do with the crisis, and what can we make of it?
I think we have to be very careful in the way we say, China's getting involved. It's within China's principles and their foreign policy to not be involved. This is more of their way of trying to make sure that everybody is being treated fairly in a multilateral platform like ASEAN. I think China does have interest in making sure that the situation in Myanmar is improving or will improve, because they do have interests in Myanmar. And before the coup, before February, it was definitely an atmosphere that was much better for Chinese relations, and they would much prefer to go back to a situation that is similar to that. So they are lobbying for Myanmar representation at the summit. Is really their attempt to make sure that everybody is engaging in dialogue, everybody has fair, equal opportunity to engage with each other, and maybe try to encourage this situation in Myanmar, but also within ASEAN countries to resolve this in a respectful manner.
Okay, thank you so much, Angeline. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. Terima kasih kepada Angeline Tan, penyelidik ISIS Malaysia. Itu saja masa kita ada dalam Awani Global Jam ini. Bersama saya, Naila Huda. Kita jumpa lagi. Salam hormat.